Welcome to prayer meeting tonight. Our devotional thought is overcoming by faith. And we'll be looking at Hebrews chapter 11, starting at verse 29, and then reading to chapter 12, verse 2. The writer has a lot to say to us. You know, it's interesting. The writer does not identify himself at the beginning or at the end. Many people feel that Paul is the writer of Hebrews. But people that study literature say that there are things expressed in a way that is not the Apostle Paul. It probably I've heard suggested that maybe Barnabas was the writer of Hebrews. But there is nothing really to base that on other than conjecture. One thing we can know about the writer of the book of Hebrews, he was definitely a Hebrew scholar. And I don't just mean the language, I'm talking about the religion of the Hebrews, the Jewish religion. Because the purpose of the book of Hebrews is to relate the Old Testament form of worship with the temple and the sacrifices and the feasts, and show how those are all fulfilled in the coming of the gospel, including the observance of the Sabbath, how all fulfilled in the gospel. Certainly, there's a lot of faith that we see exhibited in the Old Testament. And that's what this particular passage is all about. And the writer of Hebrews, you know, he's been talking about our faith and what it is and what it means to us. And now he reaches into much of the Old Testament, the book of Genesis, Exodus, the Judges, the Kings, and so forth like this, and brings to mind some very important names that are familiar to us that have read the Bible. So he starts off in verse 29 with the Hebrews as they're leaving Egypt. They're now at the Red Sea waiting to cross over. He says, by faith, they passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, whereas the Egyptians attempting to do so were drowned. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they were encircled for 7 days. By faith, the harlot Rahab did not perish with those who did not believe when she received the spies with peace. And what more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, also David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions, quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, became valiant in battle, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. Women received their dead raised to life again, and others were tortured, not accepting deliverance, that they might obtain a better resurrection. Still others had trial of mockings and scourgings, yes, and of chains and imprisonment. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, were tempted, were slain with the sword. They wandered about in sheepskins and goatskins, being destitute, afflicted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains, in dens and caves of the earth. The writer gives us a long list of people we are to look upon as champions of faith. We are so impressed by how these saints believed God and remained faithful through all kinds of disappointments and all kinds of tragic events. And while we think of these saints as people above the ordinary, they were actually ordinary people, such as you and I. We may think we could never endure the disappointments and tragedies these people experienced while they were living for God. Well, neither did they, but they did. It was not that all these people were unusually pious either. Look at Samson, probably one of the worst examples in the list that the writer gives us. What is important for us to understand is that they used whatever degree of faith they had in the circumstances God placed them in. And God honored that faith, big or little. And for this, you must realize that you are not the exception to the rule. Your degree of faith, whatever it might be, is the rule. Thank God for that. That should be very encouraging. I pointed out that Samson is probably the least desirable example here. And his faith compared to, some of the others I named is pretty small, don't you think? Compare Samson to Gideon, okay? But nevertheless, Samson's faith took him through those situations he had to face. And he faced rough situations there. So did Gideon. But little faith to big faith, it was faith. And God honored it, and God took them too. Verse 39 to chapter 2, he goes on to say, and all these obtained a good testimony through faith, did not receive the promise. God having provided something better for us, that they should not be made perfect apart from us. Therefore, we also, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which so easily ensnares us, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Notice a very important fact given to us in verse 39. All these people named, they kept their faith, even though they did not actually receive the promise. Now that is faith. In verse 13 it says that these died in the faith, having seen the promise afar off, and they were assured of them. And while the promises were real and substantial, these people were like pilgrims passing through the land on the road to those promises. Now, they did not see themselves as citizens of the world they lived in. Instead, they saw themselves as citizens of the world to which they were headed, the eternal world beyond this life. You see, they were assured of the promises, and they looked on the earthly life as a mere journey on the way to those promises. Well, how about us today, 2022? Perhaps we are too attached to this world. We could learn much from these examples of these dear saints. In fact, verse 49 says that God has provided something much better for us, something that makes us perfect, meaning that we are made complete in God's perfect will for us. See, we have their examples. And some of these people were people of little faith, as I mentioned just a minute ago. And we may well see ourselves as people of little faith or as weak faith, but we can follow their examples. Hey, they showed us the way, and that way is to use the faith God has given you. The writer says, using that, let us strip off anything in life that slows us down or holds us back. And the writer specifies what he calls the sin which so easily ensnares us. That's what he wrote. The sin that so easily ensnares us. Hey, we're holy people, aren't we? So we no longer have to commit sin, do we? So what is this ensnaring sin? How many of you ever read the book of Hebrews before? How many have read it more than once? How many have read this chapter more than one time? How many maybe read it more than 10 times? Maybe 20 times, okay? Since you're all experts on the book of Hebrews, especially the 12th chapter, the 11th chapter, 12th chapter, well, where we are, somebody please tell me what this ensnaring sin is. Anybody want to volunteer? Anybody want to guess? Who's chicken? I see some honest hands going up. Appreciate your honesty, Brother Larry. I said his name on, you know he's chicken. Okay, come on. What is this ensnaring sin? It is the thing that has everything in its favor. Okay? Now, theologians like to call this besetting sin original sin or inherited sin. Have you ever heard of it called that? Okay, yes, we've heard that. Well, it isn't any of those. It is not any of those. The besetting sin, you might want to write this down, okay? The besetting sin is the easy way out of a hard situation. A way out that would compromise our faith. Keep it in the context of what the writer is writing about. Heroes of faith. And we are on that same road. And we have the same circumstances that come against us. And there is a besetting sin that they had to face, that we have to face, and that is looking for an easy way out of the problem. Okay? All right? It is when Jesus says, stand, that our flesh recoils and looks for an easier way to perhaps accomplish the same thing, we think. Okay? Now, we have these examples, but Jesus is our real example, right? Do you realize that Jesus himself faced this besetting or ensnaring sin in the Garden of Gethsemane? Aha, I see light bulbs going on. Father, all things are possible for you. Take this cup away from me. This was the temptation. This was the challenge of the ensnaring or the besetting sin. So, what was his response to the besetting sin? Well, by faith, he went on to say, nevertheless, not what I will, but what you will. Not my will be done, but your will. We are told that Jesus is the author and finisher. Did you catch that in the text? He's not only the author of our faith, he is the finisher or completer of our faith. As he stood by those saints in the 11th chapter of Hebrews, he will stand by you and bless your little faith. Whatever challenge he allows to come against you, you will undoubtedly feel an urge to find an easier way through it. But the only acceptable way through the challenge is obedience, no matter what it may cost you. What did it cost Samson? Pushed the pillars of the stadium down and took more Philistines with him in his death than he did during his life. We have the examples of many that overcame their challenges by faith. And if Christ gave them grace to do that, so will he do for you and for me in whatever challenges he may allow to come our way. Amen.